As a medical student, starting in 1983, I was taught to critically think, and there are a couple of assumptions that we've heard today that I'd like to challenge. One of the assumptions that we heard is that high vaccinations protects those vulnerable, and it reduces the probability of those people vaccinated to spread the germ to others. Never once in my 37 years have I ever seen a study that showed that a vaccination makes the bacteria or the virus disappear from the body of those who are vaccinated. And yet, all we continue to say is that once a vaccine is given, not only are people immune, but the bacteria and viruses are no longer in their bodies to transmit to others, and that is not true. We also heard that once you are vaccinated, you are immune. Well, actually, the textbooks don't say that. The textbooks say that 2 to 10% of children who receive a vaccine actually don't develop an antibody at all. And then there's a whole number of children who will develop an antibody, but we don't even know the percentage because they will develop the antibody but won't be protected at all. So there are more children who don't develop protection from the vaccine than are actually unvaccinated in the state of Connecticut. We are told that unvaccinated children are the only children and the only people that are capable of spreading germs. But that's not true either, because vaccinated children can still spread germs. They can still carry the bacteria and viruses that we vaccinate against, and so can adults. Adults can also carry the bacteria and viruses that we vaccinate against. We are told that when you vaccinate, the bacteria and the viruses completely disappear from the earth. Well, they don't. They change activity, they may mutate, and you heard before that the measles virus doesn't mutate. Well, it does. There are cases of outbreaks in Canada that have shown that a new virus came about, and there are studies in the literature that show that when a vaccine is given, you can induce a strain replacement, meaning that over time, the bacteria and the viruses will mutate, but they don't disappear from the earth. They are still here, their activities change, and they may even mutate. And even those who are vaccinated can still carry them and transmit them. But unfortunately, we're targeting 2% of the children who are not the sole carriers or transmitters of germs. And vaccinations don't stop people from carrying and transmitting germs just because they've been given the vaccine. And my last point is we heard that vaccines are unequivocally safe. We have a public health crisis in our midst. Chronic illness, brain damage, neurodevelopmental disability, and there are chemicals in the vaccines that are shown in animal studies to contribute to this kind of brain inflammation that we are turning our backs on, and we are creating many of these children, and we are ignoring it for the sake of continuing to vaccinate. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, Representative Claire DeStitris.
Thank you for your testimony. I just have one question. Excuse me. Some of the vaccines and the ingredients in the vaccines we've heard about could be aluminum, could be mercury. Is there some concern that when these ingredients are given to such young children that as we heard, their immune systems are not completely developed yet, if it stays in their system and or stays in their brain and does not come out of their system, as what we've heard is it's supposedly supposed to leave their system? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you heard earlier that there's no real concern about aluminum because it's such a small amount, and so it really shouldn't matter. But the kind of aluminum that we put into vaccines is a different kind of aluminum that we see environmentally. This is called a nanoparticle, and nanoparticles bind really tightly to the bacteria antigens, the virus antigens, the food protein antigens, and any other contaminants that are in the vaccines that we may not know about. And we know that the biochemical properties of nanoparticles is that they are capable of entering the brain. And so we have not evaluated the safety of the aluminum nanoparticle and its injection and where it goes when it gets into the body and whether it gets into the brain. Do vaccine ingredients belong in the brain? No. Do they get into the brain? No one has ever studied it. But animal studies using the same chemicals that are in vaccines that we give to children directly demonstrate that the vaccine ingredients do enter the brain. We are ignoring this information. There are scientists in Europe who've actually done studies on the aluminum nanoparticle and have shown that it can persist in the brain for years and decades. And so what we're seeing is a large outbreak of neurodevelopmental disabilities in adults, including Alzheimer's. And one of the main factors that they're finding in the brains of people with Alzheimer's is the aluminum nanoparticle that's directly related to the vaccines that we're giving. So we have never studied whether the aluminum that we're giving in vaccines gets into the brain, and we've never measured whether it stays in the brain and what it does if it does stay in the brain. But we do know that vaccines are supposed to cause inflammation in the body. But we have more than half of our children with chronic inflamed conditions. And we've never allowed ourselves to ask the question, if the vaccines cause inflammation acutely, do they continue to create inflammation chronically? We have 1 in 5 with neurodevelopmental disabilities, 1 in 10 with ADD and ADHD, 1 in 35 with autism, 1 in 11 with asthma, and 1 in 20 under the age of 5 with seizures. And the autoimmune diseases are exponentially rising, and we are finding that the viruses and the bacteria that we're injecting into the body, along with the adjuvants, create something called molecular mimicry, which means the body sees those viruses thinking that it's foreign, but actually finds pieces of those viruses that match pieces of the self. And the immune system doesn't differentiate between what it's been told to reject and itself. So it will turn the immune system on itself, leading to an autoimmune condition. We know this about hepatitis B, we know it about the Gardasil vaccine, and we know it about the flu vaccine. And we continue to say unequivocally that the vaccines have been studied effectively and that they're safe, and that's just not true.